We're also watching what other tools might be pulled here on the fiscal side. That was monetary stimulus measures by the Fed. Now we're waiting to see what could happen here. The Senate, of course, passing that phase 2 stimulus package that moved through the House. But now we're waiting to see what phase 3 package might be able to get through. And for more on that, I want to get to our next guest. Seth Hanlon is at the American Progress. He's a senior fellow at American Progress, as well as a former special assistant to President Obama's White House National Economic Council. So Seth, first off, thank you for joining us on this hangout this afternoon. The question becomes, what needs to be done to address all of the businesses and employees who are getting impacted by all of these measures to shut down, basically, and adhere to the social distancing measures that's being pushed by the White House and the CDC? One of those interesting measures that's now being floated is potentially giving aid to some of these companies that have been impacted, but at the cost of potentially taking equity stakes in some of these companies. I'd be curious to get your take and how that might be different from what we saw with TARP back under President Obama.
Yeah, it's an interesting idea. I mean, I do think that there are, the experience from TARP was that there was such a backlash. I mean, sort of long-term backlash against the banks getting aid that was viewed as unconditional. So I really do think there needs to be a strong list of conditions on the aid. And people have talked about moratorium on stock buybacks, limits on executive compensation, setting up emergency tripartite boards within companies on how they'll administer the bailout funds that have worker representation on them. So the idea is that large companies can't simply pocket the money without ensuring that their workers are made whole. The equity stake is an interesting idea. I certainly didn't expect President Trump to agree to embrace it, but it seems like he just did. A lot of details are going to have to be worked out on that one. But I think the bottom line is the biggest thing is that we need conditions on that require companies to do right by their workers if they're getting bailout funds.
Seth, I want to ask you about some of the other ideas that have been floated down in DC. We obviously have gotten time and time again talks about this payroll tax cut, just in terms of how helpful that will be for businesses that are under a tremendous amount of pressure right now. What do you think about that idea?
I think the payroll tax cut is sort of a badly targeted approach, and there are better approaches. I mean, it seems to me that the White House has moved away from the payroll tax approach and joined, many people from the Hill on both sides of the aisle in supporting the idea of the alternative of direct payments to individuals. Now, there's no doubt there's going to need to be a huge amount of support for businesses as well. I mean, I think there are things like delaying the quarterly employment tax payments, I think, which is basically a payroll tax holiday, or at least a delay in what they owe, and certainly a massive expansion of lending to small and mid-sized businesses. But I think the payroll tax is sort of a badly targeted idea, just because it doesn't help the workers by definition. If you're still getting, it only helps the people that are still getting a paycheck. It doesn't help the people that were left out.
Yeah, and I mean that's kind of the update that we're getting today too, and we're seeing that more and more Americans might not be getting a paycheck. You can hear anecdotally, I'm sure, if you're watching this, you probably have. But the numbers that we got today, the update in terms of initial jobless claims, it was estimated at 220,000. That was the estimate that we were going into, compared to 211,000 last week. The number that actually came in was 281,000, so a jump of 70,000 when we look at that. So clearly that is the theme, the trend underway right now, are people losing their jobs. And you got to think, okay, then the payroll tax might not work, as you said. But then the flip side, the idea to send $1,000 checks, that may have worked better back when we were under normal crisis mode. We're thinking about the financial crisis back in 2008. But here you've got people on lockdown who might not be able to go out and spend that money, perhaps maybe through online purchases. But what do you think the impact of sending a check like that out right now might be muted in terms of a policy proposal compared to back during the last crisis?
Yeah, so a couple of things on that. I mean, so first on the unemployment claims, that's the data that came out today, but for claims that were made last week. So I think it's really lagging. I mean, once we get the data for people claiming this week, we'll get that data next week. I think it's going to be exponentially larger, unfortunately. So on the stimulus checks, I mean, I think I hear what you're saying. I think, one thing that's critically important is that we want to get, from a public health point of view, we want to give people the comfort that they will have some income without having to go to work or without having to go, out in the world to try to make to try to draw income. So I think, just that security helps us shut down the economy from which is necessary from a public health point of view.
Yeah.
And then I do think, obviously people can. It will take a few weeks for this, at least a few weeks for the stimulus checks or direct deposits to come. And so hopefully, and I think the idea is that once the immediate crisis recedes, I mean, knock on wood, we don't know when that's going to be, but then it will help the economy bounce back a lot faster, so that we have a V-shaped recovery and not like a U-shaped or an L-shaped recovery.
Yeah, no one wants the prolonged U-shaped recovery. The idea right now, base case, hopefully getting back as quickly as possible. But Seth, last question before we let you go. I just want to ask you, because I was looking back at kind of the internal workings, and since you were part of Barack Obama's White House Economic Council, when you're looking at this, it took a lot of levers, both on the Republican side and Democrat side, to come together to get some of those measures passed. Keep in mind, the TARP bill didn't pass the House the first time, even under President Bush. And John Boehner was blamed for some of that, not getting agreement there. But when you look at this right now, it's hard to think of a time that Washington was more polarized. So how do you see phase 3 going in the way that President Trump has been able to handle this so far? As someone who worked with Barack Obama in the past, how do you grade what's going on, and how optimistic are you that things can get done?
I'm fairly optimistic. I mean, I think the major difference, to be candid, between now and let's say 2009, when President Obama was trying to pass the Recovery Act, is that both parties are playing ball here. I mean, then it was like Mitch McConnell and the Republicans, had total resistance to anything the Obama administration wanted to do. The Recovery Act got 0 votes in the House. I think it's really different right now. I think both parties recognize the need for massive fiscal stimulus. And, so hopefully I think all of their priorities will get done. And I think that's probably where things are going is Republicans will say what their priorities are, Democrats will say what their priorities are, and then most of them will get passed and we do something really big.
And that's the hope right now. And of course, if they've gone through 2 phases of this, we'll see what happens in phase 3 and whether or not the president's proposals to maybe take some equity positions or prevent buybacks does go through. But for now, Seth Hanlon at American Progress, thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Hey, investors, Zack Guzman here. Are you interested in learning more about the markets and getting the latest financial news? Well, then click right here to subscribe to our Yahoo Finance YouTube channel. Get the latest up-to-the-minute market analysis, big interviews in the world of finance, and information on how to manage your money every day wherever you are.